Hi, I'm Jason, the Curious Psychiatrist, and I'm so happy to meet you. I've been talking about how the evolution of human thought can be seen in the evolution of art, and previously I talked about how the focus of human thought jumped between religion and humanism before finally settling on the latter, and how this manifested itself as realism in art. This time we're going to observe Impressionism and post-impressionism and see what they show us about the evolution of the human mind. We're going to start in France and finish up in America. So, as usual, let's get going. As paintings became more and more real, a number of painters tried something different, something more fleeting. Instead of painting in a studio, they went outside in the open air and painted in the sun and tried to capture what they momentarily saw or their impressions. It started with a few guys with the names of Manet, Monet, Renoir, and Cézanne, Pissarro, and changed the art world. The origin story of the Impressionists is a very interesting one and deserves a video of its own, which I hope I can make one day. Today, for the short version, I'll say everything started when Manet submitted this to the Salon de Paris. It was rejected and led to this informal and loose collection of artists to organize their own show and start their own movement. Now, let's see how they diverged from what you could say was absolute realism. This early painting from Monet is a good example. Instead of the crisp, sharp rendering of previous works, you can see that it looks vague, blurry, and maybe even half-finished. It feels as if the artist hastily sketched his impressions instead of filling out all the details. And you can also feel the artist's contentment and happiness, making this quite a delightful painting. This piece by Degas shows the same trend. You can see the background, the dance floor, the dress, even the dancer's face have been reduced to a few brushstrokes, resulting in a similar effect. And this was painted by Renoir around the same time. And you can see how they each had their own distinct styles while largely following the same trend. In Renoir's works, figures are usually more prominent and their facial expressions are more detailed. An interesting characteristic of Impressionism is its emphasis on the painter, as what the painter saw in that moment is much more important than the details of the subject matter itself. This meant that the same subject could be portrayed in significantly different ways by different artists based on what their impressions were, and even the same subject could be portrayed differently by the same artist based on his or her changing impressions. These water lilies by Monet are a good example. And this change in importance takes us to the last leg of our journey. When Michelangelo first carved the David, everyone was in awe of his masterpiece. They were amazed by his craftsmanship and what he could do with his hands, but not so much on what was in his head, what he saw, and how he saw things. The Impressionists demonstrated that the value of an artwork could be determined by how an artist saw an object rather than artistic techniques. And this laid the ground for everything that came afterwards. If humanism was centered around realism during the Baroque, Rococo, and Impressionism periods, what came after can be thought of as the ultimate in humanism, focusing on what we think. During the post-impressionism period, artists drew however they wanted to draw, or what you could say was their perspectives. They weren't painting what they actually saw, but they were painting what they saw in their minds. A leading artist of this trend is none other than the Van Gogh. Now, have you ever seen the night sky like this? Or have you ever seen the stars shine like this? I sure haven't. This is how Van Gogh saw the night sky, and although it's not purely realistic, almost no one can deny the beauty of it. It's not a large painting, so it didn't catch my eye from afar, but it did stop me when I came close, and after a moment, I was totally mesmerized. And mind you, at the time, I was neither a student of the mind or even of art. Back then, all I knew about Van Gogh was that he was a famous painter. I was unfamiliar with his works and hadn't even looked at the sign next to the painting. And yet, even in my woefully ignorant state, this night sky captured me. It is that powerful, and I really, really hope you get to see it. And although Van Gogh is probably the most prominent member of the post-impressionism movement, there were several other significant artists. One was Seurat. I'm sure you don't see the world like this, but I'm also sure you can render a real scene that looks exactly like it. It's an eye-catching piece and also of an impressive size. But to be honest, when I saw it, it seemed a little bit more like a mental exercise than a thing of beauty. As a side note, it's at the Art Institute of Chicago, along with several other modern and contemporary artworks. It's a great place and a must-see for art lovers. And later came Matisse and Fauvism. As you can see, painting moved steadily away from the absolute realism of previous times and became more of an expression of the artist, just as a book is the expression of the thoughts of a writer. And as the 19th century came to a close, art left reality altogether and became abstract, or entirely the product of an artist's imagination. The first signs of this can be seen in works by Cézanne. Although he exhibited with the Impressionists at first, he later developed a distinct geometric style, as you can see here. The mountain, the trees, the houses, everything has been reduced into geometric shapes, making the painting seem neat. And this led to Cubism. Cubism was just one trend out of many, which all started around the same time. But it probably was the most influential. And, of course, the most famous painter of Cubism is no doubt the Picasso. He probably was the first artist to achieve both fame and fortune during his lifetime, and while he was quite extraordinary, he was also pretty eccentric, to put it mildly, and the story of his life makes for some quite fascinating source material. Here, I just want to show you how he took art to a totally different place. Now, take a look. And if it looks familiar, then good for you. It's a reinterpretation of Velázquez's Las Meninas, and I thought it would be a good way to show how striking, dramatic, and perhaps even odd, weird, or bewildering art had become. You can see the whole analysis of Las Meninas at the Museo Picasso in Barcelona, with a large number of his other works, starting from when he was very young, which makes it possible to trace his development all through his life. and this makes the visit quite interesting. Art went much further after that, and you've probably heard of multi-million-dollar auctions of works by Rothko or Lichtenstein or Andy Warhol. But I'm not gonna go into that. Contemporary art is a fascinating subject, but I think it's also beyond the scope of this talk, as I'm not sure what additional changes in human thought can be seen through it. But before I finish, I do want to introduce you to a painting by Marc Chagall. You've probably seen odd paintings with bluish zombie-like people, animals, and flowers by Chagall. I never really understood the fuss about him until I went to an exhibition solely on Chagall. After looking at numerous paintings of flowers, it suddenly hit me that he hadn't actually painted the flowers. Where the flowers were supposed to be was just an empty space with various colors filled in it. I was the one who was drawing in the flowers, or rather he was the one making me do it. I was astonished, and at least for me, it made all the difference. Whoa. To wrap up, I'd like to say that human thought has been focused on religion for more or less for about 4,000 years before settling on changing its focus to humanism, and then going even further to focus on what we see and later what we think. We've examined various pieces of art on our journey, and I hope I've helped you appreciate art a little bit more in the bargain. Thank you for joining me on this journey today, and I hope I can see you again. Thank you very much.